So I just wanted to go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Caleb Kinnear. I'm a senior environmental specialist with MoDOT, and I cover the Southwest District for threatened and endangered species, wetlands, and 404 permitting, Migratory Bird Treaty Act issues, and stormwater issues for STIP projects and sometimes maintenance projects. I've worked for MoDOT for about 7 years, and I'm really just interested in anything in the outdoors. So hunting, fishing, cycling, just spending out time outdoors with my family. So anytime I can get outside, it's a good day, whether that's in the for work or for play. But I graduated from Mizzou in 2014 with a degree in fisheries and wildlife, and started working shortly after that here at MoDOT in the environmental office. Before that, I worked for the conservation department during my last couple of semesters at Mizzou on the crayfish crew for Bob DiStefano. He's the crayfish biologist there at the conservation department. And basically, I would just go out and survey rivers and streams and ponds for crayfish. And so I love just getting in the water anytime I can. And so any day I get to put on knee boots or waders or even a snorkel and mask like in this photo, it's a good day. And recently I've been trying to get more experience with scuba, and have actually joined like the bridge inspection crew in hopes that they'll be able to assist with like environmental like mussel surveys, and I can sometimes assist with their bridge inspection crews when their crews are kind of running thin. So this photo here is just Gaskin Aid County Route T. It was a mussel survey we did with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and that's me there in the middle. I'm doing some snorkeling stuff. And then down on the bottom left, that's Brian Simmons with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And then the kind of the top middle is Andy Roberts with U.S. Fish and Wildlife. And those are kind of the main mussel guys at Fish and Wildlife Service. And they've helped us out on a lot of projects, doing surveys and doing reviews for our projects, and just helping us ensure that we're protecting freshwater mussels. And so, yeah, this is just the presentation outline. Basically, I'm going to be talking about just biology, diversity, parts of the mussel, life history, filtration, and kind of some of those ecosystem services that mussels provide. And then going to go into the history of mussels. So just prehistoric uses, and then the pearl button industry, and then kind of the development of plastics, and just some conservation, just current threats and protection and propagation, and then just kind of end with a few projects we have that have freshwater mussels on them. So then this is another picture here from the Gaskin Aid County Route T project. The mussel survey was with Fish and Wildlife, and that's on there on the right hand side. In my hand is a fluted shell mussel, and that's a native freshwater mussel. And then the bottom left is Asian clam, which is a non-native invasive species, and I'll kind of get into why those are not ideal. But there's quite a big difference between the size and just life history, and kind of some issues that come along with the non-native and invasive mussel species. But so I would see, when I'd be out on projects, I'd see shells on occasion and at project sites, and I didn't really until recently hadn't really appreciated freshwater mussels as far as what they did, and I didn't know a lot about them until recently. But since I've learned so much about them recently, and how they're good indicators of water quality through several different opportunities I've had here at work, like the mussel symposium we had a while back, and different projects I've worked on, such as the one photographed here. I've kind of become more interested in just finding out more about what freshwater mussels do. And just a side note, like when handling like either live mussels or even shells, that requires state and federal permitting, and requires you to be proficient with mussel ID. So I've been practicing a lot with that. And even in some states, you have to go through a test that the state provides that to show that you're proficient enough to ID different species, because different species are protected either state level or federal level under the Endangered Species Act. And I'm currently working on getting a federal recovery permit, but I don't have enough experience working under a permitted biologist. But I'm hoping that here in the near future I can do that and then be able to help out with some mussel surveys here at MoDOT. So just wanted to kind of hit on some of the mussel diversity here in North America. So there's about 300 species of freshwater mussels in the U.S. 70% are at risk of extinction or imperiled. And then Missouri has about 69 species of mussels, and then half of those are listed as species of conservation concern. And then 11 are on the endangered species list, and then one's proposed to be listed, which is the Western fan shell. And one of the projects I'm going to be talking about later involves the Western fan shell. And so I chose this photo here. It's from FMC, which is Freshwater Mussel Conservation social media post that they had a while back, just kind of highlighting the diversity of shell color and texture and shapes. I just think that mussels look pretty cool, and they have a lot of variety of coloration and patterns and shell sculpture. And they also have some pretty interesting names, such as the purple wartyback, maple leaf, rabbit's foot, monkey face, elephant ear, three-horned wartyback, rocketbook, spectacle case, pink heel splitter, and giant floater. So some pretty unique names, and what a lot of people don't usually realize with the names is that they come from just kind of the general characteristics or observations from when they're first kind of naming the mussels. And giant floater, for instance, is named that because of the shell thickness is relatively thin in comparison to some of the other freshwater mussels. And once that mussel actually dies, it can the gases can build up in it, and then it will actually rise to the surface of the water. So that's kind of why it's been named that. And pink heel splitter is another one, and you can imagine how it could inflict a fairly painful foot injury because it's got a large, it's called a dorsal, I forget what it's, dorsal wing. So just kind of interesting how they named the freshwater mussels, but I just thought this was a cool photo. This is just kind of a map of Missouri and showing the different types of mussels that are, or the different locations of freshwater mussels. And this is not everything. It's not all inclusive, but this is what is tracked by the Conservation Department. And those are either state listed or federally listed or species of conservation concern. So you can kind of see how the southern half and the eastern half of this part of the state along the Mississippi River are really where a lot of these more rare species occur, and we'll kind of get into why that is, and kind of later on in the presentation. So, and I just wanted to show a couple slides on mussel shell terms, and I'm not going to quiz anybody at the presentation, so don't worry, there's no test. But so as you can see, there's a dorsal and ventral side to the shell, and then a posterior and anterior end. And the significance to a lot of these parts that are listed here is that these actually help a lot with the ID of the mussel. So some mussel species do not have lateral teeth, and so that's an indication of what species it may be. And then if you're looking at the outer shell characteristics, this posterior ridge, which is kind of on the bottom right part of the slide, not every species has that. And then there can be even, like, they call them pustules, or the shell can even have like little raised bumps, or just even this thing called a succulus, which is basically just a little indention behind the posterior ridge. So there's some pretty cool apps out there that you can select each characteristic that the shell has, and it will narrow it down, and you can even narrow it down even further based on your map location. And so a lot of these terms that you guys won't need to know any of this, but it's just, there's a lot to know about how to ID a shell. So and then here's kind of some external and some internal anatomy of the mussel. So there's down here on the anterior end on the ventral side, there's the foot. And basically, the foot just helps the mussel to anchor to the substrate, or even dig into the substrate or move around throughout the environment. The foot provides a little bit of locomotion, and most people think of mussels as being like a sedentary, non-moving animal, but really they can move throughout the environment based on changes in water levels, or just trying to avoid different things and trying to find more suitable habitat. So, and then another note here is just the in-current and ex-current siphons. So freshwater mussels, one of the really interesting things and one of the benefits they provide is that they're a filter feeder. So that's one of the big ecosystem services they provide, is basically just anytime they're feeding, they're constantly filtering water and cleaning that water. And I'll kind of get into why that's important and how much filtration they can do later on. But for now, they just got an in-current siphon, which draws the water in over the gills and through the digestive system. And then anything that's not filtered or that's passed comes out the ex-current siphon. Here's just a slide showing the life history and reproduction. So the male mussels will release sperm into the water column, and the females will basically use that in-current siphon and filter that through, and then the eggs are fertilized and then develop into these small, basically the babies are called glaucidia at this life stage. And the glaucidia at this point lack internal organs, so they need to find like a host fish to attach to, or a host species, it's not always a fish, to attach to get nutrients and continue their life cycle. So a lot of times the females have these either mantle lures, or they'll put out these pouches that basically are either eaten or inhaled by the fish, and then the glaucidia will attach to the fins or the gills of the fish or the host, and then continue their life development. And once the glaucidia are developed to a point to where they're big enough to drop off, they'll hopefully drop off in the suitable habitat location. And that's not always the case, but if they do, that's where they can survive and hopefully get to the point where they can reproduce and continue that life cycle. So it's just really interesting that they have this type of life cycle, that it requires a host, which is kind of, you don't really think of the mussels as being able to move throughout the environment, but they really rely on that host fish or host animal to transport them throughout the stream or lake or wetland. So just some interesting facts about some species of mussels. They require the host fish, like I mentioned. That can be a freshwater drum, catfish, a salamander, largemouth bass. Pretty much, I'm not sure all of the host fish species, but there's quite a few. And if the host fish is lost, or the host is lost in that ecosystem, then basically entire populations of that species can be lost as well. Kind of another interesting thing to note is that some mussels can live up to 100 years old. And one recent time that this was observed was the St. Croix River. A population of spectacle case mussels were found upstream of the St. Croix River Dam in Wisconsin. And basically the biologists that found them speculated that they were there before the dam was built, because once the dam was built, the host fish was not able to basically traverse the dam. There wasn't any fish ladder, and so they guessed the age on some of these shells, and I believe they're going to do some cross-sectioning of the shells to verify, but they think they're over 100 years old just based on when the dam was built. So right now I just wanted to show a cool filtration video of freshwater mussels and kind of what I've been talking about, how they filter water. So I'll just okay, we'll try this again. Let me know if you can hear this.
Feeding bivalves, they can alter their environments for the better and positively affect their ecosystems and everything else that lives within the ecosystem. So filter feeding is an interesting process by which mussels draw down water and pass the water over their specialized gills. As these particles are trapped on these sieve-like gills, the water is continually passed, the particles are retained by the mussel, and then it'll go into all their other digestive parts, where they ultimately can digest and get nourishment from these particles. And the water that's ejected from the mussel is then cleaner. So they're filtering water and they're clearing the water, making light penetration possible. And so things like submerged aquatic vegetation can grow. They're excreting all their feces to the bottom, allowing for fertilization for other organisms to eat. They're providing three-dimensional structure for other fish and invertebrates to hide and kind of live within. They're also important in terms of clean water. Areas that have no mussels tend to be, darker, more turbid. The water clarity isn't as great as those areas with mussels. It's remarkable when you are snorkeling and you go through an area that does not have mussels, your visibility may be 2 or 3 inches in front of your face. And when you happen to go over a bed of mussels, the difference is so stark that you can now see almost a foot, 2 feet in front of your face just because of that mussel bed filtering the water and filtering out those particles. Just by them existing in that ecosystem, the water clarity has increased, the water quality has increased, there's more diversity, and the ecosystem as a whole is healthier with these mussels in play. And so they're the glue that holds all these different pieces together. Without mussels, the areas simply aren't as diverse with other organisms, and quite frankly, it'd be less of an interesting place. Overall, by this process of mussels simply filtering water to meet their energetic demands in order to eat and survive, we're left with cleaner water.
So as you can tell, just based on that video and this picture here, you can just imagine what it would our aquatic environments would be like if we didn't have these freshwater mussels. As you can see there on the bottom right, that water is clear enough you can see the background through there, where on the left, if there's no way you could see through that. And like the gentleman in the video mentioned, like the light penetration and aquatic plants are now allowed able to grow, and there's just a lot of benefits from mussel filtration. And one of the terms that people have used for freshwater mussels are the livers of our river, and technically the kidneys are the filtration part of the body, but livers rhymes better. But that's kind of what they've been termed as. But one study in southeast Pennsylvania was found that one mussel bed could remove up to 26 metric tons, or the weight of 5 or more elephants from the water in a single summer season. So these mussel beds are really important for water filtration. So the next part of the presentation is just about the history. So kind of one of the interesting things is that historic shell middens show kind of a glimpse into the past use of mussels and the mussel communities. And when I say a shell midden, it basically is just a pile of discarded shells. Freshwater mussels have been utilized as a supplemental food source through seeing some of these shell middens, but they've found that these can be used were used as a supplemental food source by prehistoric people. And then freshwater mussels are also considered a first food by the indigenous people communities. And when I say a first food, that basically just means that a food that provides cultural and physical health to the community, and then in turn the communities reciprocate by maintaining the health of the first food. So these populations of freshwater mussels were basically used as a food source, and then protected and kind of sustaining those kind of life-giving populations from the food source. And a couple of scientists from the University of Illinois were trying to basically analyze the caloric content of freshwater mussels, and they found that a prehistoric family would have had to consume 300 to 450 mussels per day. And I don't really know how many people were included in that, but they basically showed that it was not the primary food source, but it was obviously a supplemental to the food sources they had. And then just another interesting fact from looking at these shell middens is that one genus of freshwater mussels, the Epioblasmas, showed a sharp decline around 1,000 years ago. And this was kind of thought to be around the similar time frame of when agricultural practices began to rise, and it was speculated that basically potentially sediments or just different impacts to these freshwater ecosystems, the species was just more heavily affected. So just a little bit more about the history of freshwater mussels. So what a lot of folks don't know about the freshwater mussels is that there was a pearl button industry, and if you ever have had a pearl snap shirt or a shirt with like buttons on it, the buttons used to be made out of these freshwater mussel shells. And the guy who kind of started all of the freshwater pearl button industry, his name's John F. Bopel, and he was an immigrant from Ottosen, Germany, which is near Hamburg, and he worked in his family trade doing making these buttons on a foot-powered mill. In 1887, a German tariff caused the family business to fail, and Bopel basically came to the U.S. in search of new shell material. And the reason he did that was because his father received a box of freshwater mussel shells from someone, and he was told that those mussels came somewhere east of Chicago. And he had a fairly good understanding of how freshwater mussels filtered food, and he saw the bend in the Mississippi River near Muscatine, Iowa, and basically assumed that this area would be carpeted with mussels, and traveled there and looked at the river, and it was one account said that he waded out into the river and pulled up a shell the size of a baby elephant's ear, and then basically after that he set up shop there, and then by 1890 the first button factory was established in Muscatine, Iowa, and on the Mississippi River. So the process of making a pearl button, basically it starts in the river. So the clammers is what they were called. They would take out these small boats, and they'd have these trawls with crow's foot hooks on the bottom of it, on the trawls, and they would sweep the river. And basically, when the mussel is sitting there with its shell open, filtering water, when the hook would come by or drag over it, it'd clamp down on that hook, and they could drag up hundreds of mussels at a time on those trawls. When the mussels were caught, they were boiled for several hours to clean the shells, and then the meat was swept through, basically looking for pearls. Because sometimes, just a note on the freshwater mussel pearls, if a piece of irritant gets in there, the inside of the shell is coated with a material called nacre, which is basically gives it that iridescent coating and that shiny kind of coating you associate with like pearl buttons and that pearly color. And that can be purple, pink, or yellowish. And if it encapsulates a small particle, that can form a freshwater mussel pearl. And so they would dig through this to find these slugs or these pearls, and that those could be sold. And sometimes the meat was sold to farmers as fertilizer, but oftentimes it was just side cast. So a lot of these mussel camps would just have a pretty horrible smell associated with them, and then the type of the folks that worked there were usually just considered a pretty rough crowd in general. So they're kind of an unsightly area. And then after the shells were boiled, they'd be soaked for about a week to make them soft for cutting blanks. And as you can see on the bottom left, that shell had several blanks cut out of it, and that's where those would be sanded down and then drilled out to make buttons for shirts and different clothing. And the average button cutter could go through about 100 pounds of shell per day, producing about 3,600 blanks. And they would be sanded down on emery wheels and then sewn onto cards. And they would one article I found said that they would get 1 cent for every 5 cards they made, and so that you'd have to get quite a few buttons to make it worth it. But they would go through quite a bit of shells to get that. Here's just some more photos I found that were really interesting, just showing what it was like. And then kind of the boom of the industry came later on. So in 1890 was when the first factory was established, but by 1899 there were 60 button factories along the Mississippi, In 1904, they were producing around 11.4 million buttons, 21.7 million buttons by 1914. And then by 1916, 40 million buttons were produced at the peak of the pearl button industry. So as you can imagine, the impact on the freshwater mussels was it was incalculable almost. And the industry, the folks that worked in the industry didn't really think that these freshwater mussels would ever go away. But and when one mussel bed was depleted, they just move on downriver to another one. Warning signs of overharvest began in 1897, and one of the most prolific mussel beds just downstream of Muscatine, Iowa, was completely gone by 1898. And this mussel bed was said to have given up around 10,000 tons of shells throughout the whole time it was harvested. And then once that was gone, they just moved on to the next one. By 1910, the U.S. government set up the Fairport Federal Hatchery Biological Station to study mussel propagation in hopes that they could supplement and figure out a way to harvest freshwater mussel shells without being so impactful. And then Bopel actually began working there in 1910 to study freshwater mussels and assist with the propagation efforts. But sadly, in the fall of 1911, while he was studying mussels on the Mississippi River, he cut his foot on a sharp shell and contracted a blood infection, and later dying early the next year in a Muscatine, Iowa hospital. So whether or not they would have successfully propagated mussels to the point where it could have taken over as the main source of mussels is not really known, but it's just kind of a sad ending to how they were trying to help the situation. And if that wasn't bad enough, by the 1930s and 1940s, mussel beds became hard to find, and especially the larger individual mussels. And with the development of plastics and zippers after World War II, the mussel shells began to decline even more. And also, they weren't as durable as the plastics were. And so they just basically, by the 1950s, you couldn't even sell a pearl button. So millions of shells were just cast into the dumps, and they kind of became just useless due to modern advancements. So environmental decline and industrial pollution, combined with the lack of environmental regulations, added to the continued decline of habitat and mussel populations. In 1899, the Rivers and Harbors Act was established, and this protected basically, it was considered one of the first environmental protections, but it was mainly to protect the navigation of throughout these navigable waters. Later on in 1948, the Water Pollution Control Act was developed, and then eventually evolved into what we know now today as the Clean Water Act of 1972. The Endangered Species Act was enacted in 1973 to enable protection of threatened and endangered species. And so kind of that time period in between the devaluing of freshwater mussels until environmental regulations, there was just kind of a lull, and there wasn't a lot going on as far as like protection. And so that just kind of shows that the freshwater mussels just were in need of some help to recover from the pearl button industry. So current reasons for decline of freshwater mussels can be habitat alteration, such as stream channel impacts from channelization, mining, dredging, or fill activities. Sedimentation or head cutting could all impact mussel habitat. Also, dam construction can fragment habitat and limit movement of host fish. Roadway runoff, which is point source pollution or non-point source pollution, such as fertilizers or chemicals running off of fields from farming practices, or stream bank erosion, can also be a factor that causes mussel habitat to decline. The Mississippi River navigation projects, locks and dams, and channel navigation projects can also affect freshwater mussel habitat. And flood pool drawdown has also been seen as an issue with freshwater mussels. When there's dramatic declines in water levels, those once established communities can just dry up and die off, and then there's no filtering capacity once the water levels do come back up. So there some mussel populations have been lost that way. And then one of the last factors that's kind of an issue currently is invasive and exotic species such as zebra mussels and Asian clams. These often outcompete and outfilter, and sometimes can even smother the native freshwater mussels. And I was reading that some Asian clam populations can actually become so prolific, and they produce one individual can produce sperm and egg and are hermaphroditic, but basically so they can really explode in populations. And then if there's a large die-off, that can affect the water quality and cause increased levels of ammonia and harmful bacteria to grow. So there's just a lot of current issues right now with freshwater mussel conservation, and kind of working in the environmental office and helping out with projects trying to protect these sensitive species. We're doing what we can and doing our best to make sure that our projects aren't increasing the runoff into the waters and not introducing invasive species. And then obviously for our projects that do require work in the water, we're implementing best management practices to ensure that we're not harming these freshwater mussels. Another conservation group that I came across, and a lot of the information I have today is from FMC. And this is they're basically a society of resource professionals who are dedicated to the conservation of freshwater mussels. And I just like this quote that was up here from on the FMC page. But basically, I'm just hoping that my presentation today can kind of spur just some interest in freshwater mussels and kind of get other people to realize this underappreciated animal that provides so many benefits to the ecosystem and can really be a canary in the coal mine for showing like where there's environmental problems, and also where there's large populations of them where the rivers and streams are doing really well. So FMC is just dedicated to that. They advocate for conservation of freshwater mussels, and they serve as a conduit for information about freshwater mussels. And they promote and facilitate education and awareness of freshwater mussels and how they function in their ecosystem. So there's a lot of good resources on their website, and just different ways that you can get involved in helping with conservation and of freshwater mussels. But and kind of one of the last things that I wanted to talk about was the propagation of freshwater mussels that is actually going on in Columbia, Missouri. And I was fortunate enough to attend a field visit the other day. We've got in Columbia, the U.S. Geological Survey, Columbia Environmental Research Center, or CERC, has this basically set up where they can propagate freshwater mussels. And right now, the main species they're doing is fat mucket, but they've used others, and they're working on figuring out how to propagate other species. But really, the main one is the fat mucket, and they've got these tanks set up. Basically, they'll get the females to be fertilized, and then develop the glaucidia. And then once those are released, they'll put them in with the host fish, and essentially infect the host fish, and then let the mussels develop until they can drop off. And then they've got these little filters and chambers that they'll filter out and basically just catch the tiny mussels and then keep developing them until they can be full grown adults. So currently they're just using these as a way to study toxicity, and different studies they're doing on freshwater mussels, and they're not really using it as a reintroduction effort as far as I know. But I think they're talking about that, and just through our we've also got through our research group, we've got through construction and materials there, we've got a study going on right now, and they're looking at toxicity of different levels of sediment, and conducting a study for us just to see how our projects could potentially impact freshwater mussels or not, and then that will inform how we do consultation in the future. And this effort to use these propagated mussels for studies has really helped our relationship with the agencies such as the Fish and Wildlife Service and MDC and USGS, and it's really just helped them trust us on our projects, and then just show that we're doing the best we can to make sure we're not harming these sensitive aquatic species. So, and just ending the presentation, I just kind of wanted to highlight some specific projects we've had recently with freshwater mussels. The Gaskin Aid Route T project, Butler 60 and Lawrence 97. And the one photographed here wasn't one that I was going to talk about a whole lot, but I just thought it was interesting because it was more of a slough under, this was Henry County Route 7. And this slough basically had some giant floaters, paper pond shell, and yellow sand shell. It was kind of interesting. I wasn't expecting to find those out there. And I went out and did this field check and just found the banks were just littered with these shells. And I'm planning on going back and seeing it, depending on if there's impacts below ordinary high water. If there are, we're planning on doing a relocation of any individuals in that impact area. But so just that the first project I wanted to talk about was Gaskin Aid Route T. This was a bridge replacement over the Burbus River, and the endangered species lists showed sheepnose mussel and the endangered snuffbox mussel were potentially present at this site. In the initial survey efforts in September and August and September of 2018, only snuffbox were found, as you can on that very right side. That's a snuffbox, and that's I think Andy and Brian from Fish and Wildlife Service doing their sampling there. And then during the relocation effort, basically everything downstream of the bridge and under the bridge in the direct impact area was relocated. They found an endangered scale shell, which was not listed on the official species list. And this project required a formal consultation with Fish and Wildlife Service, and they included a take statement allowing for take of, I forget the number of individuals, but it was several of each species. And even though it was non-lethal take, it was still required that we do the formal consultation because they were being moved from their original habitat location to a different location. And this was just a really cool success story, just how we worked with Fish and Wildlife Service, and they assisted on a lot of the surveys, and we got to do some of the surveys with them, and it was just a really cool learning opportunity. And we even had Bridge assist with some hydraulic analysis to show where the causeway was placed, and it was just a really cool project. And it wasn't one that I was in charge of. My boss, Chris Schultz, who's on here, this was his project at the time, and it was just a really cool success story for freshwater mussels. Butler 60 is another one down in Southeast District. This one is a bridge replacement over the Black River, and this location has records for pink mucket, which is a federally endangered species. And also, one of the things that they found when they did the consultant did the survey was a large population of western fan shell, and that species, if you remember from the start of the presentation, is proposed to be listed on the Endangered Species Act, and so they're actually going to be conducting a mussel relocation. They're doing that this week, and it's been an issue with the water levels and everything, and they haven't been able to get down there just due to the high flows, because this area is influenced by a reservoir further upstream. But they're planning on relocating the mussels, and I'm planning on attending and helping with some of the snorkeling and moving some of those individuals to different suitable habitat locations. And this is just a really cool project that doesn't happen very often, where we're relocating mussels, but seems to be more common nowadays. But And so just one of the last projects I was going to mention was Lawrence 97. This is on the Spring River down in Lawrence County in Southwest District. This is a bridge replacement on the same alignment. And this was, there was records for Neosho mucket here at this location. And the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Andy and Brian, went out and surveyed this area and actually found that there were no Neosho mucket here. There was only a few common species such as the spike and the round pigtoe and Wabash pigtoe. And they surveyed the whole area and didn't find any of the federally protected species. But even though they didn't find any federally protected species, we're still going to incorporate some BMPs and some job special provisions to make sure that the habitat, kind of as you can see on the far right, those are little patches of the habitat where they found the mussels. We're going to make sure that the causeway is not directing flow in that area and increasing, basically scouring out those areas and losing that habitat. So even if there aren't federally protected species, we're still trying to make sure our projects aren't impacting those, even though the requirement is just that we don't have any adverse effects to federally protected species. We're still making sure we're trying to do our best to keep these common species common in these situations. So that's basically all I had for today. And I just wanted to thank everybody for signing on and taking the time to do this, listen to me talk about freshwater mussels. And hopefully I provided everybody today with some interesting facts or maybe some things you didn't know. And maybe you can try to learn some more about freshwater mussels or find out where they may be common in your area and try to help promote just water quality and just hopefully the information I provided today was helpful. So I was just going to share this slide we had for our contact information for the environmental office. So if you have any questions going forward about projects or just in these areas of the state, these are the environmental specialists that will likely you'll be talking to. So yeah, I just wanted to thank everybody again and open the floor up to questions. And I'd asked Chris, I don't know if he has anything he wants to add or clarify. Hopefully I did a all right job with explaining everything, but if there's questions, let me know. And I just wanted to open the floor up if anybody has any questions. So, and you may have some questions on what this picture is. So this picture is the USGS, their lab, and this is the sediment study. They've got these little mixing, basically, I don't know, mixing stations, and they've got different levels of the different sediments they have in there. And there's live mussels in there actually, and they're seeing what effect the sediments have on them. So I just thought that was kind of an interesting photo. So, and I guess I brought a few materials to show. I just was going to say that the conservation department has these kind of handy field guides, and if you write to them, basically just asking for one, they've got a bunch of these, and they'll just send you one if you give them your mailing address. And that's what I did with this. And then a couple other really handy field guides. They've got some online PDF versions of this. It's the Freshwater Mussels of Ohio. You can Google search that. And I actually had the print shop here at MoDOT print this for me from the PDF. And so I've got that as a resource. So there's a lot of information online you can find, but if you want any additional information or have any other questions, just let me know. So, all right. Well, if there's no questions, if you have any questions after this, just feel free to email me or call me at those numbers. And hopefully, yeah, like I said, you learned something today that you didn't know and it was worth your time. So just wanted to thank everybody and hope you guys have a great rest of your day. So.